Whenever you're in an edge area, that's where you'll see more of these plants. So you're seeing Japanese knotweed, you're seeing multifloral. It's because this is an opening right here. So any place where you have branches that are crossing each other, you need to select one of them and take it out. So like up here where we can see this one curving, it's curving out towards my left, I would cut that off right where it comes off of the trunk. You're exploring, stepping into this world of doing permaculture design and wondering what it's about. It's geared towards this notion of how do we bring people from a lot of different places in life to do things in a way that's ecologically intelligent that meets them where they are. So when we talk about ecological consciousness, that comes back to how can human beings begin to create cooperative ways of living that are planet-wide, because we do all share what goes on this planet. You might want to debate with me philosophically. Are we intrinsically, inseparably interconnected? And I would say to you that if you're taking pharmaceuticals and peeing them into your septic system and I'm drinking them in my water, yeah, we're intrinsically, inseparably interconnected. Whether or not I like it, because I don't want your pharmaceutical, but it's in my drinking water now. I don't want the lead and mercury from that coal-burning plant, but it's in the trout I'm eating now. So what goes around comes around. The whole thing is circling. And we need to start to be responsible in how we hold, for instance, corporations and businesses in particular in this country accountable to that. And as long as we continue to not realize that we've got corporate overlords running our government, we live in a corporate oligarchy. We don't live in a democracy. We give subsidies to dirty industries that should have gone under. We give tens of millions of dollars to the coal industry, to the cattle industry, to the nuclear power industry. Do you really think that we should be keeping them alive? Because in a capitalist system, we wouldn't give subsidies. Capitalism would actually let things that were economically obsolete die. Why, for instance, would people who are responsible for the most contaminated sites in the world be allowed to walk away laughing all the way to the bank, which is what they're doing? The government likes to think that dilution is the solution to pollution, right? So a lot of times there will be contaminated water in an aquifer with trichloroethylene in it. They'll pump that water out, they'll pump water in from a clean stream that's nearby, mix it with that underground contaminated water, and then re-release it in that same stream, because now it's at the appropriate parts per million. So 37% of our rivers and streams in the land of the free and the brave, 50% of our lakes and ponds, you better not eat anything out of them, you better not go swimming in them. We're taking contaminated stuff and we're sticking it in a pile somewhere, and then it's leaking into the ground. So a lot of our Superfund sites on the eastern seaboard are old landfills. The EPA says that there's no landfill liner in existence that's going to last more than 2 decades right now. So what that means is that all landfills we're making now in 20 years, Superfund candidates. So there's a lot of things we want to pay attention to as far as how we make what we make, and where can we keep materials on site and as natural as possible. So that by separating things out and not putting them in one big pile where you can't separate out the good from the bad and it all ends up in a toxic soup, this is what we call a monstrous hybrid. Because a monstrous hybrid is when you take something that you could have put on the compost pile and you take something that you could have turned back into another metal widget and you mix them together and you throw them in a landfill. Now I can't compost it and I can't make another metal widget. So now I've got toxic soup because the metal widget stuff leaked into the compost and it all went into the ground. And that's the kind of stuff we're doing because we're so frivolous and energetically inefficient in this culture. We've just got all this incredible wasteful fossil fuel energy that causes us to do things in a way that creates massive quantities of pollution and waste loads that, if some folks have seen the story of stuff online, that they're estimating that 99% of what your average American buys they're throwing away within 6 months of having purchased it. And this is partially because we're such a disposable consumer society. People aren't buying houses every 6 months, but they definitely are buying all kinds of little material products and things that become obsolete. Oh, I need the latest iPod, not that iPod. And just to touch on that, let's not have any illusions about computers being a clean product, because they're not. Silicon Valley in California, where the computer manufacturing industry started, is one of the highest densities of Superfund sites anywhere in the United States. And they're all directly linked to computer manufacturing. You can't even get into the discussion of the value of them in the classroom, in my opinion, until you get past the ecological debit that they inherently leave. The pattern of civilization is that forests recede and deserts advance. So over and over again, most complex, urbanized, centralized, agriculturally based settlements have caused their own demise through deforestation of their upland watershed, through over-irrigation and salinization of desert soils, through the introduction of goats, which then became feral and ate all of the tree seedlings that grew back. We've decimated what it is that made the earth a lot more comfortable for ourselves in a great deal of the landscapes where we now live. In other words, we cut down all the trees, paved them over, and built a lot of buildings, and suddenly we need to use a lot more energy to stay comfortable in those landscapes. So the more that we deforest and diminish the amount of vegetative cover we have on the earth, the harder life becomes for us, and the more energy inputs it takes from industrial tapping the black sun of fossil fuels that are reserved solar energy for millions of years ago. I want to be very clear about a couple of things that distinguishes permaculture, which is it is not biocentric. We're not trying to save the world for the world's sake. We're trying to save our own asses. We're not interested in Rousseauian romanticization of the past. In other words, we're not going to glorify hunter-gatherer lifestyles. We're not going to glorify anything about how we were doing things pre-industrial era. But we are going to glean relevant information from those periods towards how do we design ourselves out of our present predicament. The main thing that permaculture brings to how to change agriculture and help it evolve is moving away from annual cereal crops as a primary staple, certainly not replacing them. Annual herbaceous crops have their role in our designs, but they right now are being way over the top relied upon for our food crops. So that now we have a food system that, as I mentioned, 60% of our food coming from rice, wheat, soy, and corn, all of which are annual crops. Annual crops require this constant breaking of the ground, constant reseeding, and a fair amount of maintenance, and because they're human domesticates, they tend to require a fair amount of attention in order for them to be able to do well. And those are all genetically identical, in many cases genetically engineered varieties of rice, wheat, soy, and corn, providing 60% of the world's food. How much of our air is polluted to where we shouldn't be breathing it? How much of our water is polluted to where we shouldn't be drinking it or swimming in? How much of our food is so toxic that we shouldn't even be ingesting it? And how much of our economy is fundamentally grounded in something that's based in destruction and exploitation. So when we have those types of legacies, then we realize that also just little baby steps are significant and are a good idea. This is why another concern I have is that oftentimes when people approach ecological issues, they approach it from an idealistic viewpoint. And they tend to think, for instance, if I can't do this 100%, I don't want to do it at all. So if I'm not buying all my food locally and biking to work and making all my own clothes and making all my own tinctures and using an outhouse and composting and, if I'm not doing all of it, then why should I just compost? Why should I just bike? So anything and everything is kind of where I'm coming from with it, because I guess I'm coming from this perspective of there's nowhere to go but up. Right? Really. We're going to need to take back ownership of food production. Because if as a citizenry we actually want to change the quality of what it is that we're eating in our diets, we're actually going to need to participate in some level in regenerating local agricultural production. Whether it's by buying a share in a CSA or by actually gardening. But in some level, we're all going to need to participate directly in that revitalization of those local food production systems, because if we don't, and we instead sit back and complain about the issues that are happening with large-scale agribiz products, we're then just going to leave it up to corporations to try to solve our problem by handing us another product that has a certain label on it. So the permaculture is very interested in economically savvy ways of revitalizing our local economies. We're not interested in just offering ideas that are sort of flim-flam and make sense in one place but don't make sense in another place. So when you're doing consultation, you're looking for what are the things that actually make sense for this population in this place. And you do a lot of homework into what are the niche market added value products or materials or services that a person can offer that really help to improve their quality of life and create more of an ecological local economy. Why I'm encouraging you all to get involved in creating cultivated ecosystems and actually gardening and doing physical work on the land is because we have drastically changed the face of the earth. And we need to see ourselves as individuals as part of a continuum of evolution that we're participating in. We come from this heritage of a lot of mismanagement and destruction. We right now sit in a place which is the largest military superpower in the world. And how this government and how this economy does things ultimately sets a huge example to the rest of the world. That's also part of our power. And we want to own that power and be intentional with that power and realize, oh right, we're citizens in one of the most powerful G8 nations in the world. What are we doing with how we're living here? And how am I as an individual keeping that military monstrosity from just killing us and killing the planet? What's pointing us in the direction of the work we need to do is our understanding of the history of these mismanaged land use patterns that we're inheriting now, that can give us more confidence to say, okay, so now I'm going to get out in the land with my friends and create another type of land use pattern that's based on regenerative design, that's based on cooperating with how nature works, that's based on responsible stewardship of what it is that we're going to harvest from now and share with future generations, and starting to set up those landscapes to be regenerative, to be abundant, and to be polyfunctional. Let me outline it for you so we see which direction we're going to go. You want to scoop some of that out?
Somebody tonight will have a little surprise.
Yeah, we need to.
When they step into that thing? I know, well, I was thinking what we could do is put a couple rocks around it. Yeah, start to ring. Has anyone put their hand in there and felt how cold that is? Or you can tell that's spring water. This is your first day of doing spring development, and now you by no means are done with what this spring is going to need. You're just at a point where you're going to discover what's next.